Nigar's book Under the Tamarind Tree and Safinah's terrific novel The Idle Stance of the Tippler Pigeon. So let's begin with Safinah. She can tell us a little bit about her book.
Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for being here today. I know there are a lot of interesting side-by-side sessions going on, and you're welcome to hop in and out. We hope not to bore you. So my book, The Idle Stance of the Tippler Pigeon, is my second novel. The first book that I wrote, the first novel that I wrote was Eye on the Prize, and that has been converted into a TV series called Daud. This novel is, has also been longlisted for the Asian Fiction Prize 2023. This novel is very close to my heart, and it talks about a relationship between a pair of siblings and their house help. So I tried to tell this story with as much empathy as I could. It deals with loss, trauma, grief, friendship, and there's, I mean, I'm always very conscious not to give spoilers because I start talking about the book and then I give away too much. But I've tried to show that there's a certain manner in which we deal with our staff with, and how a person from a lower class is propelled into the middle class, and what are the effects of such progression. So Misha and Zuhaib are wealthy, and Nadia's mother, who's the third character, she works for Nadia and Zuhaib, Misha and Zuhaib's parents. And we see that Misha and Zuhaib's parents try to help Nadia with her education. You know, she's almost raised as her own child, but not really. So you see these little, you know, nuances and little things that I try to touch upon, in which you see that even a good deed can sometimes have a two-way effect. It can be, you know, she does obviously get agency later, and she's educated and she gets a better job, but she also in her mind is unable to let go of how she was treated. And she wasn't treated badly, but it's just a family saga of how these two siblings grow up, and some events happen and they may or may not meet again.
So,
Nigar?
Yeah. Nigar.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here at KLF. It's such a huge honor, and I'm so grateful to be on stage with Safinah and Taha. So my novel is my debut, and it's called Under the Tamarind Tree. And this is the US and Canadian cover, which the book was released in August 2023. And this is the UK and Commonwealth cover, released in November 2023. And I've been asked by Liberty Books to let you know that if you are interested, they are taking pre-orders, and they have ordered this from the UK because they sold out. And it will be very reasonably priced, and you will get a 10% discount if you pre-order.
Love it, Nigar. Love the marketing.
Love the marketing. Love it.
I was told to do it, and I can now check it off my to-do list. Yes. So a little bit about the book. This book is set entirely in Karachi, and it is told in two timelines, a present-day timeline and a 1964 timeline. And in 1964, the main character, Rosina, and her three childhood friends are in their 20s, and they're very close, but they're also keeping dark secrets from each other. And those lead to the tragic events of a single night that changes their lives forever. And in the present day, a much older Rosina, she's in her 80s, she's living in Karachi, and she gets a telephone call from someone she hasn't heard from in over 50 years. And this person asks for a favor that could reveal all those secrets and destroy everything Rosina had tried so hard to protect. So So that's what the book is about, but whenever I get an opportunity to listen to authors speak, I always want to know what the book is really about. So I'm going to tell you what it's really about. This grew from my desire to know more about my own parents' youth and their family struggles during and after partition. So obviously, partition happened way before this book even begins, right? But my characters would have been children, just like my parents, and I wanted to examine the effect on children of such a traumatic event and how that sometimes ripples throughout their lives. It's also about love, romantic love, which is, I think, PG rated in the book. You make up your own mind. And love for family, and also that very strong love we can have for childhood friends. It asks the questions, how far would you go to protect the ones you love? So that's my little pitch.
Yeah. So I'm here to talk about my book, No Funeral for Nazia. This is the British edition. The Pakistani edition will be out later this year. Not the same cover though. There's a Russian language edition that just was released one of these days. I haven't seen it yet, but it's out. And it's a very different cover. So this book is a little different. As the title suggests, there is no funeral for Nazia. Nazia Sami is a celebrated Pakistani author, not a real author. And she decides that when she dies, she wants to have a funeral, a party, not a funeral. Now, that's an unconventional choice, as many of us would know, because she completely eschews the rituals and rites of mourning that we are so used to. We have 3 days of mourning, we go through various rituals, but she doesn't want any of that. So I set this book over the course of a single evening where her friends come for that party, and something happens at that party because there's a mystery guest, and that mystery guest is somewhat linked to her, but at the same time, he's doing his own thing there. I don't want to give too much away, but the thing about No Funeral for Nazia is that Nazia doesn't appear in the linear arc of the novel. She is dead from the very first page, and yet she is an overpowering presence. In my previous novel, typically Tanya, which some of you may have read, it's okay if you haven't, I won't kill you, but in that book, Tanya, the main character, it was written in the first person voice, and she has a dominant presence throughout, to the extent that minor characters or even secondary characters don't get a say. With this book, I decided that the protagonist would lose that overpowering voice, and other characters would be in a position to evoke her memory. So she exists either as a fantasy in their mind, they'll tell stories about her, their memories that they share, and most of the people at that party don't like her. So yeah, that's the best part about it. And technically it falls within the genre of mystery fiction, but I believe in bending genres. I believe there are certain tropes associated with mystery, and I don't like those tropes, so I want to do away with them. So I used the mystery genre for my own purposes, which probably gives a heart attack to the people who love mystery, but that's what I like to do. So yeah.
So Taha, tell me, the idea of throwing a party instead of a funeral, is it secretly something you want?
Horrifying as it may sound, but I'm not as courageous as my characters. I wouldn't rebel like that. Even now, when it comes to the grieving process, I believe there are certain rituals that have been in vogue for a reason. And I suppose for someone like Nazia, they don't work. But for me, they
No, I think it's excellent how you've, taken an event that we're sociologically, trained to think of in a certain manner, and made such a such a wonderful evening out of.
I wouldn't call it a wonderful evening, but I suppose
I'd like to be there. I think at such a party.
death and grief are very personal, and even for me, when I was writing this book, I was aware that the characters haven't processed what has happened to Nazia. They don't like her. They have their own reservations about her. Interestingly, all the characters in the book, apart from Nazia, they have nicknames. So there's a character named Parveen, she's Pino.
Yeah.
There's Durdana, she's Dolly. Noreen is Noori, but nobody has a nickname for Nazia. And for me, that was interesting because this was somebody who was different from everybody. And her death means something to all of them, but which they don't really realize. So yeah. Nigar, you mentioned...
Could I ask you something first?
Oh,
Yes.
all right.
I wanted to know how you deal with death and grief, which is such a serious topic, and yet you've made it into sort of a more entertaining story.
I think when it comes to the grieving process, we're told that it's a linear trajectory, that first you'll have to process it, and then eventually acceptance comes with
the 5
time.
steps.
But I don't think it's linear. And even when we're grieving, it's very difficult to grieve for the people you have lost to death. I suppose to some extent it's easier to grieve for the people you've lost to life, people who are living. But when it comes to that, you've lost the connection altogether, but your life keeps going on. And even in those moments, you're not completely detached from everything else that's happening around you. If somebody cracks a joke, you will laugh. If somebody, even if you're sitting at a soya, you will smile, those pleasantries you have to still deal with. So I don't think, yes, death is a morbid concept to write an entire book about, and that also a funny and mysterious novel about, but I think it's something that all of us deal with in life in some way or the other.
So you're also normalizing it in a way.
I'm trying to normalize conversations around death, because death was never explained to me. I started writing this book as a way of explaining death to myself, because it wasn't properly explained to me when I was a child.
Okay.
And I don't think anyone wants to have that conversation with a child, but as you grow older, you realize that it is fundamentally a part of our lives, and you can't detach yourself from it. So what do you do with it? You write a novel about it and try to understand what it really means. And even then, you don't entirely understand. Nigar, I wanted to ask something about your book. Okay. You mentioned something about intergenerational trauma. Can you talk a little bit about how your book deals with that?
Yes. You know, when I started doing research for this book, I came across a lot of oral histories, the oral histories that are put together by Citizens Archive of Pakistan, in which they collect actual accounts from survivors of partition, and they have started recording them and archiving them. And when that happened, I learned that there are many, many people who have never spoken about their experiences. So it is something that lives within them, inside them, and it does affect decisions, life choices. The ripple effects are felt throughout their lives. And of course, there's no single solution, but I think the first step is just recognizing that, yes, there was trauma, because sometimes that's just bottled up, and you look ahead and you say that we're in this new place, then let's make the best of it. But let's also recognize the loss or the trauma that one is going through, and then you can work towards healing. But if it is not even recognized or spoken of, then there can be no healing. So I wanted to bring that to light. Yeah.
Both your books deal with multiple narrative perspectives. Why don't you tell us something about it and then ask Nigar?
So like Nigar said, my book also deals with a time hop. So you see children's life and then you see them as adults. And because the themes of the book talk about classism and, income disparity and just the very recognizable class structures in Pakistan, I wanted to sort of draw an example that children don't really care about money. You know, the way they deal with their friendships is not to judge on where the person is from, but it's not so much, the adults don't, you know, deal with their relationships that way. So the mother is, even though she's doing something charitable, she's trying to do a good deed, yet she's unable to sort of detach herself from the ingrained, you know, social concept that it's a maid's daughter in her house. So the themes that I'm talking about here are actually that, you know, the childhood trauma that it carries on till your adult life. And my book also talks about a time hop. So you see this, you know, these children playing together, and then you see them in their adult life. And then there's how to deal with grief in their adult life. So one character goes into therapy. That also happens to be a boy. So, you know, some taboo topics of how it's okay for men to also express their feelings. And unfortunately, that opportunity of therapy is not given to the maid's daughter, although they go through the same trauma. So just trying to draw parallels between, you know, just the opportunity and the means to get over their grief as well. And the format used is first person, it's letter form, epistolary format. And my first novel was a third person narrative, so it was kind of a juggle for me to completely switch the way I write. But yeah, I think that's...
Safinah, I have a question about mental health issues and how and why you decided to include them in your novel.
So Nigar, the children go through an incident that I may not mention here.
No.
And
read the book, everyone.
The aftermath of that incident is so traumatic that we see a family break. You know, so when a family goes through something and doesn't deal with it, you know, because we all have different ways to express grief. You know, like Taha also said, you know, we find different measures, we find different manners of expression. So because they went through something so traumatic, they also had to deal with that trauma in their adult life. And different characters had their own sort of escape. You know, the parents had their own escape, the child, you know, had their own ways of dealing. And I think it's important in fiction especially to touch upon these themes that you may not converse about in, you know, over a dinner, for example. So I feel like fiction really makes you think and asks, you know, the right questions.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So you were telling me, before you dived in with that question, I was going to ask you about how you deal with multiple perspectives in your novel.
Yes, so just like in Safinah's book, there are 2 timelines in mine, and what I did was I completely immersed myself in 1964 first, even though the first chapter is in the present day. So I wrote that, and then I just had to immerse myself in the 60s, for which I did research because I wasn't old enough to know what was going on then. But because I was writing about a setting that I wanted to come alive, I didn't want to keep on switching back and forth. I just wanted to be in one time period and just feel it while I was writing those chapters. And then the present day chapters, I just wrote a couple of lines each time that would come in the manuscript for me to remember that I need to come back here and make it more robust. And so after the draft of the 60s, I came back and I wrote about the present day. And then, of course, a gazillion edits and wove those 2 timelines.
Was it difficult to, though, organize where to sort of cut you know, the background story and the present day story? Was it difficult to structure it, or was that the editors sort of coming in? Because I'm sure there was something that you handed in which already you had to make a call on it.
It was difficult because you want to make it interesting, and because there are so many secrets and revelations and kind of twists in this, you have to make sure that you don't give anything away. In the past chapter, there should be enough information to make you want to turn the page, but not too much that now you have all the information. So that was a little tricky, but also really fun, because I think we write because we enjoy the process of writing, and so it was fun, though challenging. Yes. Yeah.
Also, it's very interesting, you know, how we, as fiction writers, when we write a character, I think there's so much of a background story. You know, what are the character motivations? You know, why is a person doing something in a manner? It has to go back to where either, you know, the character learned it from or something happened to the character. So Taha, I'll come to you and ask you, what kind of research was involved? Because there is...
Say it.
I was just looking for a nod.
By all means, say
There's a hypnosis involved.
Yes.
And my question would be that, did you research? Did you go through a procedure where you were hypnotized?
Okay, it's fascinating. It's
I'm
fascinating that you asked me this question. So somewhere, I started writing this book in May 2019, and somewhere in June 2019, when I reached the 15 or 20,000 word mark, I said, oh, so now I want to write about hypnotherapy. The mystery guest is a hypnotherapist, and like all mystery novels, or perhaps this is a postmodern detective novel in some respects, there is a detective. The hypnotherapist serves as a stand-in for a detective. I don't know much about hypnotherapy. I had to ask a lot of people, you know, is this the right path for me to pursue? They're like, why don't you put yourself through it? I said, okay, do I want to do this? Because I've always believed that my characters are a courageous version of myself. I am not that courageous. So what I did was I started reading about hypnotherapy, and what I discovered was a lot of people using hypnotherapy to go back into their past lives and try to understand things, and I couldn't do that. So eventually I had conversations with psychologists, psychotherapists, hypnotherapists, and they say, you don't need to actually go through this, but you have to remember that this is a process that is guided by the patient at that point. It's never that someone puts you to sleep by, you know, waving a watch at you, and it's not like that. It can be like that, but it's not always like that. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis. And that was a trigger for me, because I realized that these characters can go wherever they want to go in the landscape of their mind, as long as they're willing to go there. So even when they go through those hypnotherapy sessions to understand their relationship with Nazia, there are certain things they don't want to explore. And there are certain things they are ready to explore. They even lie to themselves and to the hypnotherapist. So there are points when I felt I was being a bit, you know, devious, because I was making them lie and, you know, do all kinds of things. But then the person I was speaking to, the trained therapist, he said this happens because this is a first session. It's just one session. In one session, you cannot deal with a lifetime of trauma. So that's what it is. And there was a lot of research involved and a lot of terror involved as well. I wrote this over a period of 7.5 months, the first draft, and then I kept it aside and I was terrified of what I'd done. So
Nigar, this question is actually for the both of you, and I'll answer it, you know, after you both do. Was there one particular character, or even more than one, that was challenging for you to write? You know, was there a character where you kind of there was a hang-up and you thought that you weren't doing it justice?
I always start with characters. As you mentioned, we need to know where they're coming from, right? Their motivation, what they want, and what's standing in their way, basically. So what I do is I put them in situations and figure out how they would react just to get to know them before I even start writing the actual manuscript. And I did that. I spent about a year just learning about my characters before writing. I completed the manuscript, it got sold, and then I worked with the publisher's editor, and they said I had to make the ghosts more present on the page. And of course, I should have taken a lesson from Taha, because he has a person who's not living, but very much present on the page, right? So I didn't know that then, and I should have just taken a lesson. But that was really the hardest thing, because there are a couple of characters who are not living in the book, but the publishers wanted their presence and their impact to be felt on the page. And so I think that was challenging for me, but I think it came out pretty much as they wanted, because those characters are now felt by the reader, even though they don't exist. Yeah.
And do you have a favorite character?
Of course, I have a favorite. Unlike parents, but very much like grandparents who have favorites, I have a favorite, and she is Rosina, because I feel I'm just really proud of her from navigating all of her losses and moral dilemmas, and how she balanced the needs of family and society with her own personal goals. Because sometimes in, especially the 60s, society expectations were such that personal needs were put second. And so I think she did it very gracefully, even though she suffered through losses. Yeah.
Taha?
So for me, my favorite character was probably Nazia. And there was a lot of research involved in that as well, because as Nigar mentioned, she's not on the pages, but she dominates the pages. She's on the titles, and perhaps No Funeral for Nazia, the title is her revolt against the rituals of death, and for the reader, it's a reminder that she's always there in some way or the other. But the easiest part about writing Nazia was that I could make her up as I go along. Every character had a different story to tell about her.
Oh.
And that's what made me curious about the difference between your public image and your self-image.
Yeah.
It's very easy to say that, okay, that person was terrific and he did this and he did that. And then there's another version of things where they didn't do all those things. And then there's the inner self, the person she was. We never get to see that. And that version is completely missing from the narrative.
So are you saying that you built her as you wrote?
Eventually.
Oh,
The way
wow.
I write characters is that I let them speak. Initially, I'll just write dialogue on a page and see how it sounds. So for me, that's how I get to know a character. And then I try to understand the layers of mystery in that as well. So it is easy in some respects, but it's very difficult to follow that approach. Some people might say that they're speaking, so yes, you're filling words and pages, but the psychology behind that character is the one thing I have to excavate, and that takes time. So yeah. And you
So
were
I'll
going
just
to
answer my own
question.
question.
Yeah.
So for me, I think Zuhaib, who is in his late 20s and he lives in London, he was very difficult to write because he is also suffering through mental disease, and I didn't know how to fill his day. When I was writing him, I was just thinking, okay, so he has a job, and then he has friends, and he has, this disease. What does he do all day? so for me, to fill that was a challenge. And I hope I did justice to it because,
You did.
it shouldn't feel like I didn't know what I was doing.
Did you research? Did you
I
find
did,
some?
I did. Of course I
Okay,
did.
yeah.
I found out, what kind of doctor he would see, where would the
Okay.
doctor sit, what kind of,
What people
hallucinations
do
he
to fill their
had.
days.
Yes, of course. I had some friends,
Good.
who I said, okay, tell me, what do you do between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m.?
Yeah.
And I have to say that my favorite character was Nadia because I feel like she was such a champ. She's the one who's the maid's daughter. And she isn't even very likable. When we write characters, a lot of times our editors and publishers tell us that your character should be likable so that the reader can root for them. But I don't personally believe so. I think that we're all flawed and so have to be our characters. There's always a positive and a negative side. And some things that she did may have been questionable, not necessarily very positive. But it's also the cards you're dealt with in life. Nobody is, not everyone has, the opportunity to act the right way. So she was just thrown a lot of things in her life, and she did, she was the best possible version of herself. And I think she learned, and hopefully for the generations to come, the education that she got, she would be able to transfer that, to her children.
I suppose we should read from our books. If you'd like. Yeah?
We could do a short reading.
Yeah.
Would that be okay? All right. Do you want to start, Taha?
Safinah should begin.
Okay.
We'll go, then we'll move to you and I'll do it last.
Okay, so this is a passage that sort of explains the title of the book because my father says that, why do you keep such difficult titles? It's so difficult to remember. Can't you just go with Eye on the Prize or something simple next time? So this passage is from Misha's voice. Misha is a 7-year-old girl, and she's at Seaview with her brother and her father. Misha, Karachi, Pakistan. Do you see that bird, Misha? Baba says, pointing to a string of pigeons lined up on the thick electric wires connected to the poles. Baba, those are pigeons, not birds, I say coyly, as if I know so much more than him. Well, yes, a pigeon is a kind of a bird. And do you know what kind of pigeons those are? I don't know. Grey pigeons? Haha, yes, Misha, grey pigeons, that's the perfect type. Such a dodo you are, Bhai says, jeering. So, grey pigeons can be a type of pigeon. What are you, a bird scientist? Bird scientist? You mean ornithologist? Bhai keels over laughing. Hey, bache, don't make me regret bringing you guys here, Baba says sternly, his thick eyebrows raised in mock anger. They're sort of grey, but they're called Tippler pigeons, Baba resumes. Oh, okay, I didn't know that. What's so special about them? There are lots of things special about them. Firstly, they're very intelligent, just like you, he says to me, smiling. I broaden my chest, just like I see Bhai doing when he feels proud about something he does and is complimented on it. I also manage to steal a glance towards Bhai, who makes a face at me this time, quietly. Second, they have exceptional endurance. What does that mean? I ask, confused. Baba has this habit of using really big words sometimes. They fly right over my head, even before I can pronounce them in my mind. It means they are tough. They may not look like it, but they are. They can fly for almost an entire day. 20 hours or so. But they look so lazy, just sitting in a line, so idle. Like they have no worries, Bhai says. Yes, Sohaib, but we can't be so quick to judge, can we? You know these birds are so tough and so intelligent that there are flying competitions they're entered into. People train them and then get prizes if their Tippler wins. Sort of like a dog race, but for birds. In the sky, I say smugly. Haha, yes, exactly like that. I can't believe it though, they look so peaceful. Like they could sit on those wires all day, says Bhai, deep in thought. Yes, beta, just remember, sometimes things are not what they seem. Don't be fooled by the idle stance of the Tippler pigeon. Always make it a point to discover, look, and observe.
So, as I mentioned, this was told in two timelines, when the characters were in their 20s and then when they were in 80s. But I am going to read the prologue, and that is the only section in which Rosina, the main character, is just 9 years old. Okay. 9-year-old Rosina stared ahead, squinting in the dark at the hordes of shouting people racing toward her family. Were those sticks and spears raised above their heads? Why were they so angry? Her mother grabbed Rosina's wrist and pulled her off the tonga. She landed hard on her knees, but her father didn't stop to check the bleeding skin below her frock's hem. Her mother only yanked harder, pulling and dragging until Rosina got up running. She had to run so fast she had no breath left to ask why they couldn't go home. Wouldn't they be safe if they just went back? It wasn't even far. The house in front of Rosina exploded into flames. Fire leapt into the night sky, and dense smoke entered her nose, scorching her insides. September's humidity already dripped streams of sweat down her face and back. Now it all bubbled to a boil. Rosina spun to her mother. Light from the flames swirled on her face. She stood frozen in place, confusion and fear contorting her mouth into pained twists. Swiveling on her feet, Rosina searched for her father and Faisal, but they weren't there. Bodies with bundles of clothing and suitcases and children in their arms ran around haphazardly, their screaming faces blurred by darkness. She turned back to her mother. "Ammi, I can't find," but a mass of people was racing toward them now, from the direction of the fire. Every second, the men grew closer and louder, as did their thunderous, angry yelling. Why? Her mother didn't wait to find out. She turned and ran, her hold like an iron cuff on Rosina's wrist. Crowds pushed against them from the front and the back until they ripped right through her mother's tight grip. Rosina was pitched away. Bodies shoved against her, colliding from all sides as she scrambled to her feet, trying to keep her head up, eyes searching. Two women ran toward her, mouths open, arms waving overhead. Were they neighbors? Would they take her to her mother? But instead of stopping, the women charged into Rosina, throwing her flat on her back. Gasping to catch her breath, she tried to stand up against the wave of bigger, stronger bodies, but her already bleeding knees fell hard on the ground over and over. "Rosie, Rosie!" Her head shot up. "Here, here!" She spun around, searching, and saw Faisal. His face grew in size, running toward her, the whites of his eyes reflecting the light from the burning house behind her. "Rosie," he screamed again. "Run, Rosie, run!" Where to? Behind her was the raging fire and the approaching mob, and in front, from a lane across the street, a bigger, even louder group of men emerged. Faisal pushed her toward the fire, pointing at the house next to it, a safe house, where their parents were headed. It would lead to another house behind it. Another house? A safe house? He shook her by the shoulders and aimed her toward it. "That way, just run, Rosie, run." Without looking back, she ran like she'd never run before. That was the last time Rosina saw her brother.
So the passage I'm going to read is from very early on in the book. As I mentioned, it's an unconventional party, and the nature of the conversation is wild, chaotic, messy, problematic, and that's what you're going to see right now. The passage features 4 characters: Dolly, who is Nazia's publisher; Fareed, who is her husband; Noreen, who's Nazia's sister and is responsible for organizing the party; and her childhood best friend and frenemy, Parveen. So here goes. Whose idea was it to have a party instead of a funeral? Fareed asked. I think it's absolutely brilliant. You must have saved a fortune. Don't say that, Fareed, Dolly responded, mortified by her husband's insensitive remark, especially after their conversation in the car on the way over. Noreen stared impassively at her guests and heaved a loud sigh to indicate her displeasure. Fareed's smugness was irritating, but hospitality prevented her from telling him off. I think you did the right thing, Parveen's voice ricocheted through the drawing room. People spend so much on funerals these days. They're such impersonal affairs. You can't even grieve openly. She paused, tilted her neck back, and chugged her wine, leaving red drops on her chin. Mrs. Sadiq, my neighbor, attended a male colleague's funeral some weeks ago, she continued, sloppily rubbing her knuckles against her lips. They had worked together for 29 years at the bank and had become good friends. But poor Mrs. Sadiq just couldn't cry at the funeral. She didn't want her colleague's wife to become suspicious. As it is, Mr. Sadiq is the jealous sort and had insisted on accompanying her to the funeral. Imagine what he would think if he found his wife crying at some other man's funeral. Noreen guffawed happily as she heard the story. Something about Mrs. Sadiq's dilemma seemed to make her lose her equanimity and urbane refinement. Had she been hosting a funeral, such behavior would have been frowned upon as a sign of disrespect towards deceased. But this was different. Through her unconventional demands, Nazia had released her from the constraints of mourning and its etiquettes. For the first time, Noreen admired Nazia's benevolence, the freedom that her death had provided them. She could be herself or whoever else she wanted to be. So,
should we open the floor for questions, or
yeah,
do we keep talking?
I suppose we could take questions from the audience. Yes, we already have a question, Nadia. Yeah.
I have the perfect question and comment for Taha. You know, so Arthur Conan Doyle was a mystery writer and most famous for Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
But what was close to his heart was his spiritualism essays. Got it?
Exactly.
And so the thing is that your book, I don't like Nazia. I think she's like horribly manipulative. And I have one word for you, envelopes, which doesn't give anything away, but you know what I mean. However, the mystery element, as well as a kind of lack of reality element, is well combined in this book. That and you managed to do that. Are you the speaking of past lives? Are you the reincarnation of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle?
I don't know. I suppose if I were to say yes, I am, it would really be, it would make headlines. I could say that, but
then make headlines. Come on, what sort of novelist are you? Move it.
We could say it, then it would be okay.
Yeah, yes.
But you understand what I'm talking about, combination here.
Yeah.
Right? It works in your book, and you're writing in the 21st century. You've been able to do something which he would probably have wanted to do himself, but couldn't.
I think it is an unconventional book in some respects. So I could do anything I wanted here. I could bring out my inner Arthur Conan Doyle. So, yeah. Any other questions? Any? I am a little stumped. A little. You've got me there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Uzma. Sorry, this question is going to be very boring, following the very interesting one. But I would like to know more about, as each of you, your story about how you got into writing. And I think that would be something very interesting. And I know that two authors right now, Nigar and Taha, you talked about what your process is of writing, but Safinah, we didn't get to understand yours. So that would be an added question. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. My process is, again, my writing is very character driven. So I start thinking about characters in relationship to each other. And this particular story is actually set in my childhood home. So, you know, us cousins used to be running around and doing funny things. And I wanted to write a story about that. None of the characters are based on any of us. But I wanted to show that, you know, the gravity or the grandiose of living in a home where there are lots of children and they're up to mischief. And how they interact with each other in their, you know, in their childhood. But I think my process generally is that I first know who my characters are, and then I start writing character sketches for them. That, you know, what do they look like, what have they been through. And for Nadia and Misha, I wanted to really talk about their friendship more than anything, you know, a friendship from a person who is almost like an employer. And I think the relationship between the siblings is also something that I wanted to explore in my writing. And there is a time hop. So like Nigar said that she wrote the entire, you know, one timeline in one go. I kept hopping back and forth. So I kept adding on things as they came to me. And funnily, I knew the end when I started. It was the middle that, you know, you had to kind of reach the end in a certain manner. So even, you know, a few writer friends that I was talking to at the time, I was like, I know what happens to them, but I need to make it, you know, worthwhile for the reader to understand how it happens. And I don't want it to remain in my head. You know, sometimes you have a scene, but you're not able to put it on paper, and it doesn't come across as something that you were thinking in your mind. But yes, I think the middle part is what most of the work is put into.
Yeah. There was a part of the question about your writing process and how you got into writing as well.
Oh, how I got into writing.
Yeah,
I've been a reader. I've been a reader all my life. I don't think I knew I could write for the longest time. You know, I think writers are, not anymore, but writers are meant to be very shy people. And they're not always very confident in their work. It's not that, you know, we know that our first book is worthy enough to be published. So when I started writing, I wrote a little bit of poetry. My first novel that I wrote about 20,000 words, and which I thought was absolute rubbish. But I showed it to someone and I was like, would you want to read further? And she said, why not? And I was like, okay, that's at least, you know, enough for me to keep writing. And I think, yeah, I wrote the first one, and then I had another story to tell. And I think one thing that I wanted to ask myself before writing anything was, why does my story matter? There are so many books out there, you know, in bookstores on the shelf. What story am I telling, and why is it different to any of the work that's out there? So my stories generally ask a lot of questions. You know, if you are able to read any of my work, I think it's going to, after you finish reading, it's going to ask you a lot of questions. So you sit down with the book and, you know, just kind of think what the characters were about.
Yeah. So we just...
Nigar, I enjoyed the book, but in the beginning I was thoroughly confused. I'm sorry, the time jump really threw me. I didn't know what was happening. But in the end, you put it together very nicely. Suddenly everything fell in place because there were so many questions in our minds. So, how did it happen?
Please, no spoilers. Yeah.
Okay. The characters, I mean, how did they sort of get together in the end? Because apparently they hadn't met for 50 years.
Work around it, work around it.
Walk around it, don't say anything.
All right, all right. I enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So how hard was it to get the book published? Because you mentioned this was your debut.
Yes, this was my debut, but it was not my first novel. That one is in a drawer or on a file on my laptop. As Safinah is saying, it's a process. And about a decade ago, I am also a reader, like all of us. First, we're readers. And then about a decade ago, I decided that I wanted to try a novel. I was always writing in short form, but just for myself. So I started this process. I took a class, and I'm a bit of a nerd. So I feel that if I want to do anything, I have to study it first. So I spent 4 years taking classes, attending conferences, doing all sorts of learning, and writing that first book, which didn't get published. But I think all of that taught me so much. So then with the second one, I did manage to find a literary agent, and it was not easy. It was a lot of hard work, but I love the process. I just love writing itself, and I think that that gave me enough joy to just keep me going, regardless of where the end would be. Yeah. What about your writing? How did you get here? Yes.
I was a journalist. I always wanted to write. I tried my hand when I was 15. I wasn't a journalist back then, though. I started writing poetry. I realized I was terrible at it. I dabbled in telling. I think I tried to do some spoken word. Didn't work for me either. I thought I'd write a novel and write short stories, but I realized short stories are more difficult to write than novels for some reason.
I agree.
I just feel that there's so much you can encapsulate in one short story that it's difficult to package all of that in. And then I became a journalist. I familiarized myself with the written word, seeing it on a page, seeing it on a Word document, anywhere. And then I wrote a novel when I was 17, and it was 3 years that it took me to write that novel. It was very difficult for me to find a publisher. A small press in Delhi took it on, and it was a historical novel to some extent. I don't really feel very connected to that novel anymore because I grew in a completely different direction after that, and my experiences in journalism made me familiar with whatever was happening at that contemporary moment, the politics, the way my female colleagues used to deal with each other, and the men and the unnecessary attention they got from them. And that's when I wrote Typically Tanya. And since then it's just been, then this followed 6 months after, and it took me some time to get it published because I was uncomfortable with it to some extent. Plus, the publishing industry went through a major facelift in India and across the world, and then COVID, and then finally it's out. So
I have a question for both of you, since you have 2 novels each. Did you ever feel that your second one, did you ever feel pigeonholed, that your second one had to follow some sort of same track or
I'm actually quite
genre?
Experimental with my writing. I like taking risks, even if they don't work. And I feel like, one has to strive to do something different and not go through the same channel. And I think with Tippler, I pushed it a little bit. With my next novel, I'm pushing it a little bit more. But I do have an interesting comment that I was a part of a residency in the US. Conrad is here. He mentioned me. It's only fitting I mention you. And a novelist there said to me that, no one below the age of 40 should write a novel. And I asked him, and I was like, but why do you say that? And he's like, no, because, young people, they don't have enough experience, and, they just make up stuff. And because he was older than 40. So I said, no, that's not true. You just need to be an observer and look at things closely, and then obviously do your research and know a little bit of writing.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I do think that as you grow, as we grow, our novels change.
Of
they have
course,
to,
of
you know.
course.
But that doesn't mean that there's an age where it's not
No,
allowed.
not at all. I don't agree.
I don't think you should come of age in that way.
Right.
There's
I
no
think, I
way.
think he meant in terms of experience,
Yeah.
but I don't agree with the comment.
Yes,
I just
of
feel
course,
that,
yeah.
yes, experience teaches you, but it's also, what experience?
Absolutely.
How much exposure have you had?
Yeah.
And you can write about those situations, or even writing the not self, which is a different debate of
Yes.
its own.
With each book you grow, and each book is a manifestation of your spiritual and emotional process, your needs at that time.
That's right.
So I've always felt like I want to bend genres, change things around. The previous book I wrote was technically a contemporary romance. There was no romance though, but it was just a romance with the city, a romance with her surroundings in a way, but it was marketed as a contemporary romance. This is a mystery novel. So in a way, I want to keep changing that. And I think there was a interesting quote I came across by Elena Ferrante where she said that readers will expect things from you, but why follow that predictable path? Why not change their perceptions by actually dismantling what they think you're going to do with that book and do something completely wild and different?
I think that's great. I have noticed that there are more cross-genre
Yeah.
books out there now, because I think readers have also said that they enjoy them, because Under the Tamarind Tree is sometimes classified as historical fiction, sometimes it's called suspense, it's got a present-day timeline, so it's a little mix of everything, and I think that if we give it to the readers, then they have an opportunity to love it.
That's what
And
it
you
is.
said there's a bit of romance in it as well.
There's a bit of
There is
romance.
Romance is
too.
something that I haven't even touched upon yet, so
You'll get there, don't worry.
it makes me jittery.
That's your next one then. Be
You'll get there,
jittery.
don't
Yeah.
worry. Is there any other question?
Yes, I have a question for Nigar. You've talked about the fact that this was influenced by what happened to your family. So how much of the family tales or experiences have you put in there, and especially the romance angle?
Oh. Absolutely, there's no romance in the family. None at all. Yeah. But I obviously would want to protect my family's privacy. So this book is entirely fiction. The emotional truths are there, and they are explained through a completely fictional story. Some of the setting is based on my personal lived experience, but the story, the plot, the characters really are made up, yes.
A funny thing, till someone thinks of a question. So my first book had, it was a multi-character story, and my husband doesn't read. So a lot of people came up to him just to sort of mess with him and said that, that character is based on you. So
That's
so
the
he
best
kept-
part, yeah.
That happens.
So he kept
yeah.
wondering, because there were 6 characters, he kept wondering which one he was the entire time till he watched the TV series. And he's like, okay, none of them are me.
So that's the best part about fiction.
Yes,
Yes.
I mean, you
Every-
can always, say that none of this is true and all of it
Every
is true.
character is a composite of the people you meet. So
That's right. One of my college friends said, is one of the friends based on me? Make sure it's the pretty one. That's what I was saying.
perfect.
I think we can conclude the
We can
session.
conclude
We've
the
got,
session now, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Nigar.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
being
Safinah.
such a wonderful audience.
Thank you.